So you're somebody that's dedicated yourself to tackling one of society's most challenging issues, prison rehab, and you've created this platform that I guess not only helps individuals transform their lives, but it also inspires businesses to also take a proactive role in helping solve some of this stuff. So let's start then by diving into what motivated you then into taking this path. What inspired you initially to sort of get into this space?
So it goes back to 2015. So I basically spent my career as a brand consultant, right? So I used to get paid a lot of money to colour in. That's what I used to do to help people communicate better and all that kind of stuff. And it was great. I used to get paid a fortune. It was great. And then about 10 years ago, I was asked by the Welsh Government, because I relocated up to North Wales, to go into schools to do a talk about being an entrepreneur and branding and marketing and colouring in. And on slide 2, and I presented it, and I got this slide deck together of, all these amazing people like Conran and everybody else. And on slide 2, I had a question which said, what one word would you use to describe yourself? And I've used that in business, to see what kind of stakeholders people think about business and themselves and all the rest of it. And, there was a young lad. So there was about year 10, year 11 kids. So what's that, 14, 15 years old? About 20, 30 of them in the room. And then I said to this one lad, what's your answer? And he said, weirdo. And I went, wow, what a brilliant answer, being a bit quirky and creative. And he goes, no, he said, I'm bullied. I don't fit in at school. My music's really weird. And I just said to him, wow, hang on, hold that thought. Went around the rest of the class, and at least 40% of the kids associated with negative perceptions, abnormal, freak. And it was just like, it was heartbreaking for me, because my eldest daughter was the same age as they were. And I literally, in that session, I grabbed my phone and I said, okay, I said, this phone here has got code in it, right? That's how it works. It's got an operating system. I said, if there's glitches in that code, what happens to the functionality of the phone? And they said, well, it won't work very well. And I said, well, is that the same with human beings? And they went, yes. And I said, okay, so if you could I said to them, so if you could understand your code, could that help you then make sense of stuff that maybe is the output of your life, the outcome of your life? And they said yes. So literally I had 50 minutes left, and I put together some crazy exercises in the 50 minutes to help people think about their thinking, which I've done for big organizations. And at the end of the session, we all agreed we're all freaks and misfits and weirdos, and what a wonderful world it is. And that was 10 years ago. And then I did loads of research into things like, the prison system, pupil referral units, education, self-harm, suicide, stuff that people 10 years ago didn't want to talk about. And I just went, this is nuts. Surely I could create some kind of creative thinking exercises and whatever to help people shift that thinking. And that was 10 years ago. We now work with prisons. We now work with big businesses. We work with, schools, colleges, everything, to help people, and literally from age 6 to 106, to help people shift and change that thinking. And got into prisons again this year and just realised that the problems aren't going to go away if we keep on doing the same stuff. So something has to change. And we created this program this year called Counting on Confidence, which is linked with the Prosperity Fund from Sunak's government, which is all to do with that sense of agency, that sense of identity, that sense of belonging. And that if you can shift and understand that through education, through learning, then you will change the outcome of your life. And that's what we've been doing for the last 7-8 months in prisons, 300 plus prisoners and staff.
Yeah, so tell me through then the practicalities of that program and how you are getting those results. Just walk us through, how does it work? How do you engage with these prisons, and how, what the outputs then?
Well, we've been into 3 prisons so far, and hopefully we'll go into the Young Offenders Institute down in Feltham, which is, notoriously difficult, prison. So we go into the prison, and it's a 2-day course. So it's 2.5 hours each day. And it's all to do with the individual's thinking. Why do we think the things that we do, and how have we arrived at that thinking, and how might we shift that thinking? So if you've lived in a blue world, everything's going to appear blue, isn't it? Well, if you then say, well, actually, there's a bit of a red world and a bit of a yellow world and a bit of a green world, you kind of go, really? And then that changes your perspective on how you see that environment. And that really is what it is, Tom. It's like it's that we are a product of our environments, whether they're good or bad. But if we've always lived in an environment that's been negative or been, based on criminal activity or whatever that is, then the obvious thing is that we're going to keep on performing around that environment, aren't we? And that once you change the internal environment to think, well, actually, there is a better way to think. I want better outcomes, for my family and for my friends and everybody else. Then things change.
How much easier or harder is it to run that type of program in a prison environment? So where people are serving time and they're in that kind of institutionalized world, aren't they? Does that make it easier for them to engage with a program like this, would you say?
No, because what you find is that the majority of people who are in prison have had a really bad time at school. So I mean, you see it right from nursery. It's they say, don't they, the apple never falls too far from the tree, and it's true. It's like you kind of know the kids that are going to end up, in prison.
Yeah.
I mean, the statistics are there, and is it hard? Yeah, it's hugely challenging, Tom. I mean, I would say it's the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but also the most rewarding, because you've got people who hate education and everything that education has ever stood for them. Their parents didn't like it, or their parent didn't like it, or whatever that is. So when you send somebody to the education block in a prison and say, "Great, come on, Tom, let's go learn English and math," you're going to go, "Well, of course you're not going to do that because there's no relevance." What we do is we make all of those subjects relevant through this whole area of thinking. Why did Tom do what Tom did? And then you look at the thinking behind it and the environment and everything else, and then that begins to change. And it is hugely challenging, but it is just it's wonderful. And what you find is that I would say that 99.9% of the prisoners that we've been engaged with, they're really smart. I mean, they really are. I mean, we do something called the Carol Dweck mindset, and it's a little test between growth and fixed mindset. We've had the highest scores I've ever seen in prison, ever. Because they have to adapt to that environment. They don't have degrees. They don't have a lot of the academic skills that maybe other people have. So they have to utilize different aspects of their thinking. We've even got people who are from the traveling community who've been on our courses who, they have virtually zero numeracy and literacy skills, but their retention to information is phenomenal because that's how they've had to survive. So when you then harness all of those wonderful attributes that they've got and give them more purpose and meaning and reason, then it's incredible what becomes what you can achieve. It really is. And it's almost like a light bulb moment. The first session that we do on day one, they're sort of getting used to this idea of some of this really wacky creative content and thinking. And then you see the penny drop when they come back, usually on day two, and they're like, flipping heck, I've never seen it like that. I've never thought of my life like that. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we do with them, that's really it's very creative. But it taps into what human beings, we're naturally creative. Tom, you know this, and all the brilliant work that you do. And once you tap into the fact that as human, I mean, we use Lego as well, because Lego is a really good way of expressing stuff because we like to use our hands. I mean,
so you get them to play with Lego so that they open up a bit more? Is that the idea?
Yeah, but also explore. It's difficult, isn't it? All behaviours are communication, and when we have violent behaviours, they are also communication. Usually that's based on frustration, whether it's trauma or whatever that is. And the thing is that Lego allows somebody, a little kit, there's a little figure, to then start thinking and visualising in a model of how they feel and how frustrated they are. And, because, when you don't, it's like somebody saying to you and I, okay, Sid and Tom, we're now going to speak Japanese. Well, when you've never, ever seen Japanese or learnt Japanese, it's a totally different vocabulary. It's the same with the emotional vocabulary. You think of emotional intelligence, self-awareness, self-regulation, etc. on the goes. If you've never learnt that language and that alphabet, you're never going to be able to to understand it. But once you start giving people tools like Lego and drawing or colors or letters, numbers, or whatever it is, then they begin to start their own almost emotional alphabet,
Amazing.
which helps them
What was
communicate.
it like going into prison for the first time to start working with these people?
It's a brilliant question. Well, the first time I went in was in, I think, 2017, and I was literally invited in, and I was put in a room with, I think it was about 15 to 20 prisoners, and there was a young lady who was the warder, the prison officer, and I got some slides, and my typical thing, I've got some slides, so I, put those up on the screen or whatever, and I've literally got these people sitting there, and I'm thinking, what happens if something
Yeah,
goes wrong? I'm in a room. I'm in a
yeah,
locked room with this young lady who's brilliant. And what was really lovely was that, some of the prisoners are stood up walking around because they've got ADHD, all that kind of stuff, and they can't sit still. But what was lovely is they made me feel so welcome because I told them my story, and I talked to them about my vision to how to make the world a better place.
mm,
And they just bought into it. And it was just like, it was amazing. And then however many weeks later, we then ran a longer course, which was about 4 days. And at the end of that course, there was one lad, I'll never forget this one lad. So he was from North London. He said, I've never sat, he said, longer than 20 minutes in a class in my life. And I got excluded from school and all the rest of it. He stayed for 4 days in this course. And what was amazing is that on day one, I'd already clocked that he was very agitated. So on day one or day two, I bought him a colouring in book. Those
yeah.
wonderful, with doves and animals and stuff. I bought him one of those, and I got him a set of felt tips. And I said to him, have a seat. Here. And he goes, what's that for? And I said, because I know that you need to colour in to listen to this content. He goes, all right. And literally, he literally did 4 days with me. And he graduated, got a certificate. One of the governors came down, gave it to him. And he goes, I've
Yeah.
never sat down for that long. He said, but you engaged the part of my brain that nobody's ever engaged. And honestly, Tom, there are many
Yeah.
stories
Yeah. It
like that.
must
It's
be.
just lovely. But yeah, I was scared. I mean, I was like, oh, my life. But you just realise that these are regular people
Yeah.
that have just made a wrong decision or done something which the law says you can't do, which is understandable. So therefore, we're going to incarcerate you. But then they put you in an environment where it's
Sure.
challenging for you.
Reoffending is a complex issue, and I guess many reoffenders kind of find themselves caught in that horrible cycle, don't they? Where it's hard to break out of it because there's a lack of opportunity, all the rest of it. And you talked about that being the critical sort of missing piece, really, I guess. Can you sort of outline then, Sid, the current sort of cycle of reoffending and how social exclusion is, contributing to that? What's happening out there?
Well, I think for many, I mean, there was a chap that we met years ago, and he basically he'd come up through the care system, and had horrible things happen to him, and when he was at school, he loved drawing and being creative, but his teachers at the time said to him, that's never going to work for you, forget it, whatever. So he then dropped out of school and then associated with a gang, then started, drugs, guns, hold-ups, thefts, all that kind of stuff, armed robbery and whatever, and then ended up in prison for a very long time. And then one of the things that he talked about, I think on day 2 of one of our programs, was he said, I love making matchstick models. And I said, why? He said, because it helps me, the process of thinking. So anyway, so for the next few days, we talked about creativity, whatever. He's now been released. This was quite a few years ago. But what was interesting with him, he said, all I have ever known is this life, that in order for me to get something, I have to go and rob a bank or do something or whatever. But he said, you showed me that I don't have to do that anymore. And only until they can see that there is a different way of doing stuff, will you then break that reoffending. I mean, that's it. You have to. And there's some brilliant work being done by a guy called Steph Jones from Exo Bikes, down in Pentonville, in Feltham and Brixton, and a few others, where they actually take, young offenders and old offenders, and they teach them bike mechanics, literally over 5 or 6 weeks, and they get a certificate at the end of it. Steph and his team at Exo Bikes, they've got a bike shop in Lewisham, they've got a workshop, and they give them employment, some of them on release, but they give them a qualification. They give them a reason to do something different. And only until you can do that, give them new learning, give them new education, new tools, new
Yeah.
techniques, to new whatever that is, will you ever
Yeah.
break that cycle? Because otherwise, you'll just go back. It's like you and I, Tom. You and I will just go back to doing what we're doing because we are creatures of habit. And if that's what we feel is safe, it might be violence, it might be whatever. If that's what we know, that's what we do.
And we've had the likes of Cook on the show. We've spoken a lot about Timpsons, companies like this who are big into this. Employment is so important, isn't it? But why are we not seeing more companies kind of recognizing that and providing opportunities and maybe some more government sort of interaction as well?
I think employers are scared because, if somebody says I've got a criminal record, it's still very taboo, and understandably, you have to see it from the victim side as well. But I think with companies like, as you mentioned, Timpsons and Marston's, there's a few, rail tracks and really good organisations there offering opportunities for ex-offenders. And also, I think it's we, as a society, if you think about it, the government keeps saying, we need more prisons or, whatever. If this system had worked 200 years ago, we wouldn't have anyone in prison, but it clearly doesn't because we've got the numbers rising, we've got more prisons being built. So you have to think it's a bit of an oxymoron, really. You sort of think, well, something has to change here. In order for us to have a better society, we have to help people who are coming out of prison rehabilitate and get into meaningful, sustainable work. People don't necessarily just want to be on a production line. That's not what creatively they want to do. So I think with companies like Timpsons and many others that are doing great work, the Shaw Trust, etc., we have to give them a meaningful purpose and the tools to think differently and to work differently. And there are some brilliant stuff going on there, but I think more employers have to be part of that. And I almost would like to see some kind of citizenship where each organisation, whatever size and whatever turnover, is duty bound to give either a certain percentage of their profit to, causes to help prisoners or young offenders or whatever that is, to then help them, rehabilitate, to get housing that is not horrendous, because some of it is, but to put that pathway in place. And also, to support probation service, because probation service does a brilliant job, but they're undermanned, they're understaffed, they're under a huge amount of pressure now because of the early release program. We've got to work together as a society. So the big businesses making a lot of money use some of that profit to organisations like us or Exo Bikes or whoever that is to help these people, because, we think we've got a huge labour shortage, haven't we, in the UK? Well, you've got X thousands of prisoners coming out of prison or, every year. It's a brilliant opportunity for us to help. If we keep incarcerating and segregating, they're never going to be able to become part of society. And I know that they've done crimes. I get that. But at some point you have to say, if you've paid your dues, you've done your time, now it's time to move on.
Does it matter what crimes they've done, Sid? And in your work, do you often try to find out what the people you're working with have done? And is there a difference between, I don't know, someone that's burgled a house because they're trying to feed an addiction, or whether they've just beaten somebody up? I mean, does it matter to you?
I have to say, in some cases, yes. But then it's quite interesting. It's a great question, Tom. And there's a lad from South Wales, and when you read the judge's report on him, you kind of go, okay. Right. But then when you meet him and you listen to his family circumstances, I mean, there was another man who'd been through, so I think 5 or 6 different foster homes, care homes, right? He had been abused in every single one of those. And he said to me, Sid, are you surprised that I'm angry? And I said, no. So when you listen to his story and then you read the judge's story or the court story, you kind of go, well, hang on a minute. Surely we should have protected that child within the care system, but we failed
Yeah.
to, or society failed to. So are we surprised that this has now happened? I think the answer for me would be no. So yes, I'm interested, but I never judge. I don't go, There is only, I'd say, out of the thousands of prisoners that I've met, there is only one prisoner I've ever met that I went, actually, you really do need to stay inside because society is not safe with you out there. But all the others, no. And I haven't been to every prison. I haven't been to some of the maximum security prisons, so I can't speak on behalf of those. But the prisons that I have been, I would say that, I think that they're all... It's all understandable what
and
they've
deserving
done.
of
It
another
really
chance. But it is a taboo subject, you're right, and it is scary, particularly for business people. And I think it often in this space, it comes down to very personal decision making, doesn't it? Which I think is why the Timpson story and the like stacks up really nicely, because they don't really talk about it as if it's a CSR or philanthropic exercise. They see it as a pure business decision that these people will work harder, the company will be more productive, and they're really good staff that will stick around. And I guess it's that story that needs to be told a bit more, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely, and they're good people. Tom. A lot of them are really decent people, and I did a podcast a while ago. With somebody who was an ex-Strangeways police officer, or prison officer, and he said that he's got more friends now who are ex-prisoners than were in the prison service, and he said because he helped them, he was honest, they trusted him. To do the right thing. And I think that's just so beautiful. It really is.
What's your sense about, unlocking the benefit to the economy as a whole? Obviously, there's benefits to individuals, potentially to businesses, but there's a huge economic and societal benefit here that needs to be unlocked. And how do we make that happen quicker and at scale? Is this something the government really needs to get behind and make it a bit of a plank of their term, do you think? Or
I think so, yeah, and I think James Timpson now, in his new position, I think that people are starting to think about that, and yeah, it's massive untapped potential. It really is, and when we think of the digital economy, when I think of the thinking skills that a lot of these people have, we need them. I mean, we really do. I mean, there was one lad who said to me, "Oh, I'm rubbish with maths," and I said to him, "No, I get that," and then there's a little mathematical equation that we do with letters and stuff, and I put it up on, it was on the board, and he did it in, I think, 2 or 3 seconds, which is possibly the fastest that anyone ever done it. And I said, why was that really easy for you? And he said, well, because he said, I'm a landscape gardener, and he said, I have to work out how many bags of sand and all that kind of stuff and how many paving slabs and everything else. And I said to him, I thought you were rubbish at maths. He said, yeah, I was. He said, I failed all my stuff at school. I said, but you can apply that to that. He goes, yeah, but that's not maths, is it? And then we went through it, and he went, oh, yeah. He said, I'm quite good at maths then.
So it's a mindset shift.
Completely. In every way, Tom.
That example then of what you've done to help that person kind of understand that's what you do. So how do you describe what you do, Sid? I mean, you're almost like a teacher, aren't you?
I think so, yeah. And we always say that we help people find, live, and give their magic. And the thing is, when you look at old Maslow with his wonderful little, not that he ever did a triangle, but like a pyramid. But when you think of that base layer, we all say to people, we help you find that magic, that sense of safety, that sense of belonging. The next thing is, how do I live that magic more every day? And then ultimately go into the enlightenment bit, which is how do I give and share that magic? Because you cannot become a philanthropist unless you've got all those other bits in place. And that's exactly what we do. That's what we take people through. And it's just that, Viktor Frankl talked about it in his logotherapy and lots of other stuff. It's like, how do you help people find that sense of purpose, that sense of belonging? And once they found that, they go, aha, now I can live that. Now I can give it and share it. And coach, mentor, facilitator, that. And I'd say to people, they say, oh, thank you for helping me find whatever. And I said, I haven't. You've done the work. All I've done is just showed you different ways of thinking. Yeah. And you've connected the dots.
So just going back then to engaging with businesses on this stuff. And I think that you're right that Mr. Timpson's appointment into the government will have raised the profile of the likes of what Timpson have done in terms of supporting ex-offenders. What are the kind of practical tips and advice, recommendations you've got for businesses that might be listening to this thinking, do you know what, I'd love to get involved in this more? What can they practically do then, Sid?
I think to engage with the job centres, to find people. Also engage with people like the Shore Trust and many other organisations that can help, to talk to people like Iceland or Timpson that do a huge amount of work in this area. There's also a really good recycling company down in near Feltham called Suez, as in the canal. They're doing brilliant work in recycling, and then they then help people, then gain employment on release, etc., etc. Is it get involved with the prisons? Ask, talk to probation service and say, how can we get actively involved? Because Tom, this is never going to go away unless we all say we're all part of this. We're all part of the problem. We're a part of the solution. Let's work together.
And in your experience, Sid, onboarding ex-offenders and bringing them into your business, do they need to be treated in a different way to regular staff members? I mean, obviously, the likes of what you're doing is upskilling people, giving them the tools they can better integrate into a business. But once they're in there, what sort of ongoing support do they need specifically, if at all?
I think a lot of it is around sort of housing and things like that. So the practical side, which hopefully can be picked up by probation service or the DWP or whoever. Do they need to be treated differently? They need to be seen as people, and that they've done something wrong, which is understandable. But I think one of the things that our courses do is get people to be more business ready or be more work ready. And we do loads of work with the Department of Work and Pensions as well, so that people have got the right attitude towards work. And it's not just about the employer, it's also about the employee. There has to be a mutual understanding that benefit and value has to be created by both parties. So that's what we kind of do. But I think just to see them as people and to help them, because when you look at their backgrounds, they haven't had those opportunities.
Right. Before we started recording, you mentioned about your children. How old did you say they were, Sid?
25,
okay, so
8,
the youngest
6 and
is
4.
probably too young to answer this. But, I mean, what do they think about what you're doing? I'm always fascinated by what children think of what their parents do for work. Do they have a sense, the youngest ones, do they have a sense of what you're doing?
The littlest one doesn't really, but the other two do, and it was quite interesting. So the middle one said a while ago to a teacher, "Oh, my daddy's in prison today," and the teacher was like, "Oh," and luckily they know me anyway, and kind of smiled and said, "Oh, by the way, such and such, his dad does work at whatever." So no, I think they're quite proud. I mean, and when I went to the Young Offenders Institute the other day, in Feltham, I told them all about that and the young people. And seriously, Tom, there are brilliant people in these prisons, not just prisoners, but staff members. Oh my life! And you read all the rubbish in the press about how bad the system is. They want to meet some of these people who are running education, running employment down in these prisons. They are brilliant people. Seriously. They should be getting the MBEs and the OBEs and the knighthoods. They should. What they do in a day, every day, is unbelievably good. So my kids, I think, they're very proud, and they ask me, "Why do you do that?" And I say, because we're lucky in that we've got a home, we've got food on the table. You imagine that you didn't have any parents, or that you were thrown out of school, and they're starting to get their heads round that there is a different society which hasn't been cared for.
Yeah.
And that's the outcome, really.
Well, it's fascinating. It's a fascinating story. I really love spending some time with you, Sid. So thank you for telling it. And I've had lots of prison stories. My father-in-law is an ex-prison officer. So told me lots of stories. He's based on the Isle of Wight, was based on the Isle of Wight. So lots of interesting stories there. But it's fascinating to hear your story. And I think that merging of business and something like the prison is a really difficult one to navigate, isn't it? But I think from the work you're doing, it's proving there is huge opportunity for not only these individuals you're supporting, but also companies that really can take advantage of it. So, thank you for joining us, Sid.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me as a guest. Lovely. Thank you.